Next, I'm going to call upon Piers Coleman from our London office to give his view from inside the Houses of Parliament.
So firstly, good morning. Thank you for inviting me. As you say, an extraordinary date. And I had prepared some slides, but I could only prepare them a few days ago because things were changing hourly. As it happened, some of my slides are completely inappropriate now because events have moved on. So what I'd like you to do is to look at the slides and treat them as a series of bullet points which might generate conversation, as opposed to being entirely factually correct, because they're just not. And what I'd like to do, having heard Charles's really excellent and forensic analysis and appreciation, is to look a little bit more at the political history in the UK, because the divisions in the UK government and the UK Parliament, and indeed across the whole of the UK, are a reflection of the historical divisions that came to a head in the 2016 referendum. So if we look back, just before 2010, there is a deeply unpopular UK Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. He goes to a general election in 2010, and the Conservative Party, headed by David Cameron, are very confident of getting an overall majority. Much to their surprise, they don't. And they enter into a coalition government with the Lib Dems, which has not happened in the UK for decades. So the Prime Minister is much weaker than he thought he was going to be. He has an overall majority, not a strong one. Now, since the 1975 referendum in the UK, the Euroscepticism to which you referred, Charles, has been continuing and growing, and the move for a referendum had been going on for many years. Indeed, there was even a referendum party in the late 1990s, and they fought the 1997 general election. And then in the early 2000s, another political party called the UK Independence Party, known in the trade as UKIP, were formed, headed by the charismatic Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage, who regarded himself as a great, great friend of Donald Trump, and even expected to be appointed the US ambassador to the UK. Unfortunately, he was very disappointed. But he still thinks he's very good friends. There we have it. The UKIP are becoming more and more popular, and some Conservative MPs begin to think about defecting to UKIP in between 2010 2015. And so we get to a stage, as you said, Charles, that David Cameron feels that he has to offer a referendum in order to silence his right-wingers who all want to defect to UKIP. And so he offers the referendum and he silences them, and he fights the 2015 general election with this time all the pollsters saying he wasn't going to win an absolute majority, we may have another coalition, and then against all the odds he actually wins an overall majority of 12, which was workable, but then he has to fulfill his promise to hold a referendum. Now, David Cameron was a sort of careless man. One of his insiders said to me, Dave was a chancer, and he didn't pay much attention to the form of the referendum, so he didn't think about the fact that voters over the age of 16 could vote instead of over the age of 18. After all, it was their future we were voting on. He didn't think about giving long-standing EU residents a vote. He didn't think about the idea that the majority shouldn't be 50%, it should be maybe 60 or 65%. He was confident of winning. Indeed, he promised to sign the notice of withdrawal from the EU the day after the referendum was held if he lost. And again, he was gambling because it was never going to happen. But he had to resign first, another British Prime Minister, to lose their job over Europe. Of course, he couldn't sign the withdrawal notice the day after the referendum because actually there was no legal authority to do that, another area in which he was careless. It needed parliamentary authority first. So when Theresa May comes into Downing Street to take his place, she discovers that the constitutional lawyer's view is that we need to go through Parliament first, and she decides she's going to fight it. And she fights it all the way to the Supreme Court. and of course she loses. So she loses her first major battle, and that already removes some of her credibility. And then, of course, it goes to Parliament, and Parliament says, well, you voted in the referendum, so of course we're going to let it go through. And by a huge majority, they authorised her to sign the notice invoking Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty in March 2017. So she did that. She then decided, she was getting pretty confident by then, that working majority of 12 that David Cameron got was, well, you know, wasn't great because she was going to go through some difficult political times, and Jeremy Corbyn was a rubbish leader of the Labour Party, and he was never going to go anywhere. He was down in the polls. Let's have another general election because I can get a really big majority, and then I can force everything through, and nobody will be able to complain. It was catastrophic for Theresa May. She loses her overall majority, and she has to then reach a private agreement with the DUP, hardline unionist party of Northern Ireland, who offer their 10 seats to her under a confidence supply arrangement on terms, well, somewhere between £1 and £2 billion pounds sterling as a contribution to the economy of Northern Ireland. So Theresa May loses her second major battle, and she begins her negotiations with the EU in a not strong political position. So she then faces a next problem, which is she says to Parliament, well, of course, you know, I've now got authority to go ahead and negotiate my withdrawal agreement, and I don't need you anymore. And Parliament says, I don't think we agree with that. We think you've got to come back and get us to approve the deal that you finally do. And she fights that, and she loses again. Her third major battle, because Parliament imposes on her a requirement that the withdrawal agreement, coupled with what's called the political declaration, have to be approved first before we can actually proceed to come out of the EU. At least the one thing that she did succeed in doing was to say that she only needed a majority in the House of Commons. She would never, ever, ever have got a majority in the House of Lords. So eventually she comes back to the House of Commons with her withdrawal agreement, and which is finalised, I think, November, December last year, for what's called the first meaningful vote. And the right wing of the Conservative Party and the DUP and the whole House get really, really het up over what they call the Irish backstop. And Charles has already explained that, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. But the fact is that suddenly a huge number of members of Parliament become very powerful unionists. And they're passionate about supporting their great friends in Northern Ireland. And if in the process it happens to me that they turn down Theresa May's agreement, well, that's, you know, but they're doing it for entirely nationalistic reasons, and therefore they're good guys. So, of course, that's what happened. It's a funny thing, actually, that this week, when we're still talking about approving the withdrawal agreement, that the backstop is hardly mentioned at all now. So those unionists, well, they were unionists a few months ago, but, well, maybe it's not so important now. So we've had meaningful vote 1, 15th of January, lost by 230. Meaningful vote 2, 12th of March, lost by 149. Meaningful vote 3, 29th March, lost by 58. Theresa May even offers to resign to get the withdrawal agreement through if it goes through, and she still fails with that. And then we've had what are called non-binding indicative votes in the House of Commons, none of which have yet succeeded. We've had a public petition of 6 million signatures in 6 days for a revocation of the Article 50 notice. We've had acts of Parliament requiring that there be a no-deal Brexit and that Theresa May has to go and seek an extension. And the House of Commons and the UK are still totally divided. So there is Theresa May struggling to cope with a deeply divided government, unsubtle, stubborn, obstinate, lacking in any warmth. She has none of the skills that a politician needs to bind together her party, let alone the government, let alone to have proper discussions with her colleagues in the EU. Now, in passing, when I was a young lawyer, I remember being taught about what we called the separation of powers. And there we had, and I don't know if you have it in the US, Parliament and the executive or the government and the judiciary. And each is supposed to be a check on the others. So one of the difficulties that Theresa May has felt is that she, as the executive, had greater authority than anybody else. Well, the judiciary held her back when they said that she needed to go to Parliament to get authority to invoke Article 50. Parliament themselves are now checking her back, and she is so weak that actually Parliament are passing acts of Parliament where the government are told to vote against the wishes of members of Parliament and still lose. So she's in a very, very weak position. So that's my little bit of political history. And so who are the characters? Now then, with a nod to the Times of London and with a nod to Lionel Richie, what's it say? And now that we come to the end of, I'm not going to sing, end of the rainbow, you're once, twice, three times a loser. And there we have Theresa May at the piano. And on her left, we have, in front of her, on our left, we have Speaker Bercow, who is the one who has helped the House of Commons to reach the decisions that he wanted them to reach. We have Arlene Foster, the hardline leader of the DUP, who has been very, very influential and very, very tough in her negotiation. And then we have Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the British Labour Party, and the totally conflicted man whose party are now saying they want a customs union, whereas he actually believes that the EU is nothing more than a capitalist plot. So where are we now? Now, there are various options here, which I listed for you. Of course, I didn't know where we were going to end up, but anyway, so I'm going to go through them in a different order. So first of all, extend the effect of Article 50 until, well, we've got those dates already. Those dates are no longer any good. So the dates we currently have to worry about, 22nd of May, 1st of June, 31st of October. 22nd of May, that's the day before the European parliamentary elections. And the Prime Minister still hopes that, she can put her withdrawal agreement back to the House of Commons for a fourth vote. Why not? And if she manages to get it through in the next month, then she'll cancel the UK taking part in the European parliamentary elections, even though everybody's now starting to campaign. This is going to be bizarre. In which case we can all come out on the 22nd, 23rd of May. No, sorry, we'd come out on the 1st of June if we fail to take part in the elections which are fixed for the 23rd of May. So the EU made it very plain. If we didn't take part in the elections on the 1st of June, we're out. No deal Brexit, out on the 1st of June. Well, the view I think most people say will probably take part in those European parliamentary elections unless Theresa May can work a miracle. And then, so the final date to come out is the 31st of October, Halloween Day, as you say, so far, because, who knows, we may be back again in Brussels in October. That will be exciting. Second option, negotiate with the opposition. Oh my God, they hate each other. Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn are as opposite as you possibly can be. They're both people lacking in any charm whatsoever. They hate the idea that they have to pretend to negotiate. But the Labour Party are setting out their stall, and Theresa May says publicly, of course, both sides need to compromise. She goes into the negotiations, she says, well, we need to compromise, but I'm not compromising on my side. So it's a bit difficult to see where they'll get anywhere. They came out of one of their first meetings last week, and the announcement from Jeremy Corbyn was that this had been useful but inconclusive. And that may be as far as we're ever going to go with them, we will see. Well, we could approve the withdrawal agreement in its original form. Always a possibility, but that would mean approving the political declaration as well. And I think that at the moment is an unlikely prospect, but MV4 is still on the horizon as a possibility. We could remain within the customs union. Now, here is a distinct possibility. It is what the Labour Party are punting for and what the Conservative Party deeply, deeply dislike and are suspicious of, but it may be the only way through. Take part in the European parliamentary elections? Yes, probably. Everybody's gearing up. The person who's gearing up most of all, you may find interesting, is Nigel Farage. Now, he dumped UKIP because UKIP went even more mad than they were before, and has set up his own party, which launched yesterday, called the Brexit Party. He says, so I have to believe him, that he'd raised £750,000 this week already. I don't know if that's true. But the purpose of taking part in those elections is so that he can send people to the European Parliament who don't want to be there. Doesn't sound entirely logical to me. We can hold a second referendum. Now, many of you may have heard of the People's Vote campaign. People's Vote campaign began in the UK just over a year ago, and that was designed to make the UK think again. That Theresa May finds that difficult. She said, "But we've had one decision already, so it's all right. It's all right for the country to only have one decision. But if you want to have a vote on the withdrawal agreement in the House of Commons, you keep on asking." Well, there's a funny thing. But the push for a second referendum is getting stronger. Nowadays, it's called a confirmatory ballot, and what that means is maybe we'll put the deal, whichever it is, that is finally negotiated to the country. That is a possibility. Bear in mind, it takes best part of 5 or 6 months, I would say, to legislate for and create all the structures for a referendum. So if it's going to happen, it'll only be in October, and we're running up against the 31st October date again. Oh dear. Well, maybe we'll have another extension. Why not? Next option, have a general election. Well, Theresa May was threatening that last week. She thought this was a really good idea until her pollsters came back and said, "Do you realise that the Conservative Party are going to be absolutely thrashed? Are you sure you want to do that?" So that's not so much of an option at the moment, although the Labour Party would like it. We could revoke the notice we gave under Article 50 and pretend that none of this ever happened. There are some who would like, there are many Remainers who'd like that to happen. Is it realistic? I'm not entirely sure. The ECJ, the European Court, said that any revocation must be unconditional and unequivocal. And what that means, you can't do it just as a device to gain time. You've got to mean it. So I think that may be quite a difficult thing to do. Or you change the Prime Minister. Well, now here is, of course, something that is definite. The Prime Minister has said that she will go at the end of the first stage. We don't know when the first stage is going to be over. It may be October, it may be later. Whether she survives to October is a difficult thing. She is deeply, deeply wounded, but the trouble is that the members of her party can't decide on who will take her place. If they made a decision on who would take her place, then she would have gone already. And the leadership campaigns of half a dozen genuine candidates are already in full swing. So it may yet be Prime Minister Boris Johnson, my goodness. And I say at the end, or there's maybe another option yet, who knows. So I gave this to you because last week this was relevant. This is the letter that Theresa May wrote to Donald Tusk. And the one thing the EU Council said to her was, "You've got to have a plan. You've got to come to us with a real plan." You read this letter, it's 2.5 pages long, there's no plan. Absolutely no plan at all. So, just briefly, legal issues, because obviously at K&L we've been providing a lot of advice to clients in the US and in the EU and in the UK about what to do. Very difficult to say what to do, but a lot of people have been making plans to not just be based in the UK, but to be refocused elsewhere in the EU. A lot of US clients have been only relatively recently realising that actually that they need to take some very serious steps to protect their own interests. But hard Brexit now, the date for hard Brexit is probably the 31st of October, unless we don't fight the European parliamentary elections. So we've got a little bit of time to plan. Not a huge amount. Soft Brexit, of course, is what was originally what was going to happen during the period of the trade negotiation. And the original intention was we had a transition period to the end of December 2020. Well, if we take to October to do the first stage, then the transition period will probably be significantly longer than that. Softer Brexit, of course, means if we stay within the customs union. So heaven alone knows where that will be. But we have been providing a lot of help to clients on all those options if we possibly can. We've had, some of you may be aware, we've had an audit tool which has come out to many of our clients, which was particularly relevant in the context of a hard Brexit. And I hope we've been able to provide some really useful suggestions on those. We've had a series of calls across the world where we've had hundreds of people taking part, where we discussed the options. So finally, conclusion. The UK Prime Minister, 2 UK Prime Ministers have made some really seriously bad decisions. David Cameron, because he was careless. Theresa May, because she just got it wrong. Disastrous decisions for which she's paid really heavily, and potentially it will cost her her job. She's tried to chart a middle way, and she's ended up by pleasing nobody. The House of Commons is split 3 ways. The country is split too, but there's a sense of frustration at the political games. They don't get the Westminster bubble. And in the meantime, business is suffering. The sequence of promises, dates, broken dates, deadline dates, broken deadline dates is destabilizing for everybody. Many of our clients are concerned about the implications of a possible hard Brexit, and also they're very concerned about next few years' trade negotiations, of course, especially with a new Prime Minister. And for discussion, who could that be? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piers. That was fascinating, just fascinating look at the political dynamic